We're here for another Clean Tech Talk episode and CleanTechnica YouTube video show with Aseem Kapur, Chief Revenue Officer at GM Energy, and Lydia Krefta, Director of Clean Energy Transportation at PG&E. We're going to talk today about a hot new fun V2X program in California that they are leading. But just to start, let's try to get a little background on Aseem and Lydia, find out how you got into this space, what you've been doing in the EV charging, V2X space in general up to now. Lydia, how about we start with you?
Sure. So, I've been working in, say, like the energy industry for 11 years now. All of my time has been spent at PG&E. I was initially actually interested in just kind of like alternative transportation in general. Like way back in the day, whenever I was in high school, I was introduced to the GM concept car. It was like a GM hydrogen fuel cell car that they released that was like this super futuristic concept car. And I remember just thinking like, that's super cool, and that's something that I think would be really interesting to work on. So my like roots or my interest in EVs and alternative fuel transportation go like way back to really kind of my first intro to GM and that concept car. But I've worked at PG&E for 11 years. I've had various different roles within PG&E. I've worked in our innovation team, our corporate strategy team, a little bit of time on our finance team, and then I've been working on what we call our clean energy transportation team, which is our team that focuses on our electric vehicle programs and strategy for about the last 5 years.
Very cool. So you've been in it pretty deep for a while. And Aseem, your background on this?
Yeah, Zach, well, first of all, thanks for having us. And been in the energy industry for close to 2 decades. Have quite a bit of deep expertise in all different parts of the energy value chain, mostly on the distributed energy resource side, in terms of deploying really cool behind the meter technologies in order to improve grid resilience and grid flexibility. I've been at the nexus of clean energy and clean transportation with GM for the last 3 years, and really excited to share some of the cool technology we're deploying, as it relates to vehicle to home and how EVs can actually be a resource for the grid in the future. So I've been privileged to lead our product teams that have launched this cool product, and really excited to talk about it today.
Sounds great. You guys I love it. You guys have some obviously deep, good background. So I don't know what we'll tap into today, but I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge and stories. So we've been covering a vehicle to X, vehicle to home, vehicle to grid for, I'd say, over a decade. I'm not sure how long it's been that we've been writing about this, but for many years it's been mostly small pilot programs because that's what you start with, and that's what you've been able to do. And we're just getting to the point where now we're getting more and more electric vehicles out there with capability, with even just with vehicle to load capability, but also vehicle to home, vehicle to grid. So we're starting to get, it feels like, to a stage where we could really start to see some big notable programs. Is this one of those programs? What stage are we at with this program? And maybe let's just start with like, what is the program, right?
Yeah, so I'm happy to start. I think I feel like we're really at that point where we're about to start to see some significant participation in some of like the vehicle to X programs that we have at PG&E. So we have we call them our V2X pilots. They're a set of pilots focused on residential, commercial, and customers who can support microgrids. And we can have up to 1,000 customers participate in our residential pilots, up to 200 participate in our commercial pilots. And then folks who are in both of those pilots can also, if they're in an eligible microgrid, participate in our vehicle to microgrid pilots. And basically there's 2 phases for these pilots. So the first phase, which is what we're announcing now, is the ability to participate in leveraging your vehicle to support vehicle to home. So that's really using your vehicle to provide backup power to your home in case there's a grid outage, in case there's an emergency. And so that's an exciting moment right now that we're able to allow customers to leverage their vehicles to plug into their homes and provide that backup power.
And what will they get in return for that?
So they'll be getting a upfront incentive for participating in the program. So it's a base $2,500 incentive. And then there's some additional adders. If you're one of the first 250 people to participate, you get an additional $1,500. And then if you're located in certain communities, equity communities within our service territory, you get an extra $500. So you can get up to $4,000 to participate. Did I just do that math right? $4,500 to participate.
I would take that in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, I don't think my Model 3 would qualify, but but it definitely sounds like a great way to get people involved.
Yeah, and maybe Aseem can talk a little bit about some of the vehicles that do qualify.
Yeah. So Zach, perfect time to like consider if you want to move to a GM EV. We've got eight, of our EVs that are bidirectionally enabled. So one of the largest portfolio of vehicles that are actually capable of BiDi technology that allows our customers to be able to actually take energy off the vehicle. So I think we're really excited about the partnership with Lydia and the team in terms of this program. I think for us, I believe there are three major opportunities. I think one is really how do you build consumer confidence, right, in the technology itself. And to that end, GM is actually making like widespread investment in terms of product readiness. We brought our vehicle to home system to market in the last year after 2+ years of development, some significant field testing, and we've actually launched the product with highest safety and quality certifications, right, partnering with UL. So I think that drives consumer confidence, given we have one of the highest brand loyalties than any other vehicle brand in the world, I'm proud to say. So I think that actually is really important for us to be able to deliver these products to the safety and quality of our vehicles. So that's the starting point. The second, I think, is really the dealer network, right? The fact that we have close to 4,000 dealers across the nation. And then, starting with how we actually help drive awareness of utility programs with our dealer network is really, really important. So I think we're actually going to be able to test that with the PG&E program in Northern California. We have some dealers that are lined up in order to be able to both promote the program, and then as customers walk into our dealerships and are considering our product, they can differentiate the opportunity to be able to use the EV to power the grid. And then I think the last thing is really, again, market formation. So as we partner with some of the largest utilities in the country, how we can unlock market opportunities that drive consumer interest, right? So customers need to be able to feel confident about the technology, which we're absolutely certain that we can drive that. They have to remove the barriers for entry, and we've been partnering very closely with the PG&E team to ensure that that experience is smooth, how the product gets installed, certified by the utility. And third is actually, just customer acquisition, right? So how do we actually drive enrollment and performance in these programs? And that's where we believe the dealer network is going to be really our strength. So looking forward to the opportunity to see these three things come to bear, because that's what's going to really take to drive scale.
Yeah, two things. So one, I just saw my first Cadillac Escalade IQ a couple days ago. So if you want to send one of those over for a long-term review, I'm happy to test it out. Beautiful, top of the class and top of the market vehicle. It looks really good. But secondly, I'm just curious, there are, as long as I've been doing this, there have been extremely passionate vehicle to X fans, vehicle to grid fans. Like they're like number one, they just love it, that's their focus. But there's always been a debate about how much it could or should be used with EVs, with normal passenger EVs. And I'm just curious how much you've seen interest or openness to that among the consumer base, the customer base, change over the last few years, especially since you said you've been doing this, you've been in it for a year, offering it for a year. I assume you were watching for a while, trying to determine whether to go fully into this or not.
Yeah. So I think the way we were seeing consumer interest become more prevalent, or we're seeing the change in consumer interest, I think is really, there are two major value propositions for the customer. I think one is resilience, how you can use the EV to be able to drive, improve the grid resilience, right? Whether it's small duration outages or generally being able to use your EV to power your home as a backup generation. So that's the first and the primary use case that really gets customers excited behind this technology. I think the second is really the opportunity to be able to create value. So depending on the part of the country they live in, whether the utility programs that are available that they can take advantage of, that's part of the reason why the PG&E program is so exciting, because it provides quite a significant incentive upfront for the customer to be able to adopt the technology and then be able to test and validate the technology. So I think part of the reason why we're excited about this partnership is, because of the incentive is fairly significant. And I think in terms of since we've launched, and to clarify, Zach, we started with first launching in 5 states. We kind of tested the market to really understand, and these are states where we have seen very high rates of EV adoption, followed by a nationwide offer, which we started running truly in October. Since we've launched the sales, we've seen quite an uptick of consumer interest again in the first 5 states where we've launched. Where we see high rate of EV adoption. There's generally high degree of solar and residential storage.
What are those 5 states?
It's Florida, Texas, New York, Michigan, and California. And California being the largest state, right? And Northern California being the epicenter where we're seeing significant adoption. And what's also unique about our platform is that it's one of its first kind systems that provides a full home energy management system application, right? So EV can power your home, but then you can also add residential storage to it. And if you have a solar system, you can get a fully comprehensive home energy management system. So that creates additional flexibility for the customer. It also creates an opportunity for customers who have solar systems, to be able to interoperate their EV and increase the flexibility in that offering. So that's where we're seeing the earliest adoption. We've also had some fairly significant use cases where customers are buying the EV and coming into our dealerships just for vehicle to home capability, right? So especially the Equinox and Blazer customers who live in parts of the country where they experience frequent outages, but typically small duration outages, and we've seen a high take rate for those as well. So those, I would say, are the early use cases. And then the last piece I think is really exciting is the fact that now we've seen quite a bit of interest with dealerships in promoting the product with respect to the uniqueness, right? The fact that it's a differentiator, no other OEM has that offering. That's that unique, and allowing the customers to live in the future with a cutting edge product is also very exciting because it allows us to bring customers that typically won't consider GM products, for consideration.
Yeah, and as we were talking before the call, I'm in Florida and we've been hit with a lot of hurricanes the past few years, a lot of power outages. And we have these stationary like Blue Eddy and different power banks and energy storage systems. Some people have generators. The idea that, hey, what if just my electric car could do that and you didn't need all this is very appealing. And I think that's probably all it takes for a lot of people, just to think that. But there are other people who are like number crunchers, and there's been a question of how much using the battery for this in your car might degrade it, and what's the value of that, and how much do you get compensated for? Is it worth it? Personally, I think the research has shown that battery degradation is much smaller, much less of an issue than people thought, and that this is really not, like, I would never be concerned personally that I'm going to degrade my battery too much by using it in a vehicle to grid system. I'd be like, my battery's going to be fine. By the time the car is dead, my battery will be fine still. So I wouldn't be concerned about it, but some people might be. And it just gets to the question of what's the right compensation? How much should people be compensated? So I'll go to Lydia. I know it sounds like you have a great incentive program to get people in on this. I assume that's not the long-term. I assume that's not what would be paid in a large-scale program, because that seems high to me. Yeah. It seems much higher than the value. It seems like it's just incentivized to get people in and to get the program rolling. What do you see as, like, how do you see dealing with that, and what do you see that being in the long term, like what you would compensate EV owners and what they would want? I don't know. I feel like it's the most complicated part of this whole thing. So sorry to dump it on you, but curious to see what you say.
It's good. It's complicated, but I think it's one of the most interesting pieces, right? Because I think that the only way it works, right, is that we're able to leverage these EVs to create value, and we're able to share the value with the folks who are helping us to create that value, right? And so I think, like, we think about this and we look at it from a long-term perspective. We see EVs as this, like, really awesome, flexible resource that can support all kinds of different use cases on the grid. Today, I think we've got about 700,000 EVs connected to PG&E's grid today. And we did the math and we said that those 700,000 EVs could power the city of Oakland for like 4.5 days, like 4 to 5 days, basically, right? Which is crazy just to think about, like that much battery power kind of rolling around on wheels today. And we have a goal to support 3 million EVs by 2030. And the state just expects to see continued growth in EVs, right, through the 2030s into 2040s. And so I think there's just a ton of opportunity here. And we can leverage these EVs to do all kinds of things. One really great use case is we have a ton of the state of California, we have a ton of solar power in the middle of the day. We have so much solar power, sometimes we're paying producers to curtail that solar power, or we're selling it to other states, right? Because we have more solar power than we're able to use. If we've got 700,000 or up to 3 million EVs rolling around on our grid that can charge their EVs in the middle of the day when we have that incredibly low cost solar power, that's a really great way to integrate energy into the grid and to find ways to kind of drive down costs for all of our customers. So I mentioned the first phase of the pilot is supporting resiliency, backup power for homes. We have a second phase of this pilot where we're going to be testing what we call an hourly flex price, or other people might call it a real-time rate, but it's basically a rate that captures those values, right? And so it's able to, it captures the value of energy on the market using our day-ahead market. And it also is able to price in distribution level congestion on our distribution grid. And so essentially the basics of it are the costs are higher when there's more congestion, whenever the energy costs are higher, and the costs are lower and there's less congestion when the energy costs are lower. So I just pulled up our hourly flex price for this week to look at what some of the pricing might look like, just to get a sense of that. And on the 23rd, so a couple of days from now, it's forecasting that prices will be negative basically in the middle of the day. And so if it traditionally costs you, for us, if you're charging your vehicle off peak, it's about $2.90 a neat gallon compared to about $4 to $5 a gasoline gallon in California. So already a bit cheaper than gas. You would be able to basically essentially in those midday hours charge for free because the energy prices are -1 cent in the middle of the day. And so that's kind of how we're thinking about it. We're really trying to look at what is the actual value that's created and how you take that value and share it with the customers who are participating, and also kind of share it broadly with all of the PG&E customers so that we can drive down the cost to support this EV transition for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, I felt like it's so serendipitous that, solar and EVs rising at the same time.
Yeah.
And California is the best example where you get this crazy situation, the duck curve, as it's often referred to, and even to the point you said where the prices are going negative, and there's so much value, so much EV capacity right there. So there's been hype about how EVs could, collapse the grid, right? All the extra demand for electric vehicles could be a big grid challenge, when it's really the reverse case, when you have so much flexibility and so much flexibility and so much potential for support and for various grid services from EV batteries, that it seems like it's going to end up being a very huge, stabilizer, net benefit for the grid. And I mean, this funny case of California's duck curve and EVs being available to charge often in the middle of the day is perfect. It's crazy. So in the long term, would you mind listing the different grid services you think in the long term EV batteries, EVs could be providing? You can get technical with the, what the utility calls these, and I'm not going to ask you to put a value on it, but I'm getting the picture that you think this will be a high value, so that in the long term, it won't just be oh, sure, I'll participate and earn a few extra dollars a month. It could be okay, this is a significant benefit you're providing, and you're going to get significant compensation for it, right?
Yeah, I think
not $4,000 maybe, but
Yeah, so maybe a couple of the use cases we're excited about is definitely the one that I just talked about, being able to charge in the middle of the day, right? And so that's leveraging EVs to support kind of the amount of renewables that we have on the grid. And then simultaneously, right now, you kind of mentioned the duck curve, right? So we've got a lot of excess renewable energy at midday. And then as folks come home from work, they're plugging in all their appliances. A lot of times they're electric vehicles, right? You start to see that big ramp of energy needs as you see solar power starting to ramp down. And so that's another use case that we're really excited about, being able to, one, at a base case, leverage EVs to kind of avoid that peak period in terms of charging, but two, the really exciting piece is how can we leverage EVs to potentially discharge during that peak period. In particular, I think not every day, but in particular, there's maybe, let's say, 10 to 20 days in the state of California where the grid is particularly strained during that period. And so there's, I think, a good opportunity for EVs to help kind of support reducing the strain on the grid during that peak. And there's some substantial value there. And then the other big one.
Before you go to the other ones, and it seems like you would need also to work with like workplaces often on this, because the midday, you're going to want to be having access to those midday, right? Or you have a way around that other, just through the charging networks, or?
Yeah, no, I think, yes, I think we're trying to understand basically like how much do we need, like to your question about like, I'm not going to ask you to put a number on the value. Like we're still working through exactly like what is the value, right? And like how much participation do you need midday to really make a sizable impact on some of these specific use cases. And so I do think understanding both like what, you know, who still has vehicles plugged in and charging at home, and who, like how many of our customers have vehicles out in the workplace, I think is a really important piece of the puzzle that we're kind of working through and trying to understand.
Yeah, that's great.
If I may, I think I just want to maybe just double on one point. I think is the fact that EVs, you know, are connected, you know, assets, right? And there's so much real-time monitoring available because vehicles are, you know, software-defined assets, and we have, you know, the OnStar platform that allows us to actually monitor all these assets on a continuous basis. I think is a tremendous opportunity in terms of how we think about flexible grid services. And I think two things I want to just double down on. I think one, to your point that you said earlier, battery degradation is a non-issue, right? Like we have looked at all the use cases in terms of the actual deployment of, you know, discharging energy off the EV for grid applications. It's actually a very different use case as it relates to how the battery is charged and discharged. And, you know, it has no warranty implications, right, in terms of the EV. So I think we want to make sure that we put the consumers' anxiety, you know, to bed, you know, associated with this application. So that's something that we've doubled down on.
That's great. I'm really excited to hear that because, for one, I know you guys have been analyzing your batteries forever. The Chevy Volt batteries held up like perfectly, and it's just, this is one of those weird little concerns that people have, and I've always felt like it shouldn't be a real concern, but I don't have much to say about it, like other than I don't think it should, you know. So it's great to see that you've been researching this, the details you just provided, which I never heard. So great to get that input.
Yeah, and I think where the future is headed, you know, just as we look to how the battery technology on EVs will evolve, how the chemistries will evolve as energy density improves, some of the chemistries, you know, change to LFP chemistries, you know, that actually improve affordability of the EVs. It actually also opens up the opportunity for using more grid scale applications with EVs, right, where EVs can respond more dynamically to the grid needs, whether it's, you know, some of the use cases Lydia referred to, but we also see an opportunity with, you know, just capacity, right? The fact that you have all this capacity sitting out there, and the fact that you know, batteries by themselves can be a very good grid stabilization resource, and whether it's local distribution circuit level, you know, power optimization for whether it's power factor improvement or other things. In the future, we see a lot of opportunities, but again, you know, it starts with first consumer confidence, right? How do we get the customers there? And I think our laser focus right now through this partnership is to really remove the barriers for customer entry, right? How do we actually get the customer more confident with the product, how it gets deployed, you know, how it gets interconnected with the grid? And because all of those things essentially, if are done well, will improve the customer's confidence in the technology and the use case, that then allows us to further invest in improving the quality of the offering and making, you know, more flexible grid-friendly EVs that can then drive scale for mass adoption and really help Lydia's vision come true in terms of having, you know, millions of EVs participate in the grid, because that's what we see the future as well.
Yeah, totally. And so yeah, let's just get back to that list of what's a list of grid services you could envision, and maybe just separate them, what you're using in this pilot, what grid services they're being used for in this pilot, and longer term, what grid services you could see EVs being used for.
Yeah, so the first thing I mentioned, what we think about is what we say like system level, right? So you're looking at kind of like the bulk energy system, and this is supporting like that supply and demand of energy. The other thing that we're really excited about, just I'd say like broadly for vehicle grid integration when it comes to EVs, is the ability to potentially defer, like distribution deferral, or help manage the local grid that you're on. And so you've got customers who have several EVs that will be connected to a transformer that are then connected to a circuit, kind of a broader local, what we call localized grid area. And today, a lot of times what you see is you have a lot of electric vehicles that'll be on a timer, or people will come in and just kind of plug them home when they get home from work. And so you see what we see are like local spikes or local peaks where there's a lot of energy use all of a sudden at one time, where there's several EVs all connected to one transformer. And so I think we can both leverage just managed charging, kind of one V1G, but also V2X, V2G, right, V2H, all of the V2s, to help basically coordinate that charging, right? And so start to have, for many customers, they're driving like 32 miles for their commute a day on average, I think, in the state of California. And so you really don't need a substantial amount of time to charge. And so if you can kind of coordinate that charging over time, what you can do is basically reduce the need to upgrade a transformer or to upgrade the grid in certain areas, or defer the need to upgrade that grid for, let's say, like 8 to 10 years, right? As you're able to add more EVs with the same amount of infrastructure. And so that's another use case that we're really interested in, is how can we leverage these EVs to manage localized grid constraints, because overall then the key outcome to that is that it drives down the costs that we need to invest, right, to enable this transition, so we can enable this transition in a less costly way. And those costs then ultimately are costs that don't go into customers' rates. And so it's this really cool opportunity where what we've seen is that by adding EVs to the grid and adding them in a way that's coordinated and flexible, right, and leverages V2X, we can ultimately drive our customers' bills down over time.
Yeah, look, I think just building on Lydia's thoughts around how we think the program actually unlocks value in stages. Managed charging being the first. How can EVs react more or be more responsive to the grid needs, whether it's price signals or congestion signals, right? How do we actually drive more responsive EVs? I think that's number one. Second is resilience-based use cases where EVs become a resource. So whether it's wildfire outage mitigation, or power safety shutdown prevention, like how we actually can provide customers flexibility to be able to use EVs as a resource. I think in the future what we also see is further expanding on that. How do we actually drive customer optimization in terms of using EVs as a grid balancing resource, right? So looking at distribution circuits, and during my time at Con Ed, we looked at highly congested parts of the grid where, we looked at non-wires alternatives on how we would actually introduce storage in order to improve grid capacity and also give operatives more flexibility. And for us, the flexibility was actually far more valuable than just the capacity component. And as we think about EVs being available, right, 80% of the time they're at home, they're charging, and being available to, incentivizing the customers to be able to tap into that capacity at all times. I think just the heterogeneity of the offering of that load is very, very exciting, right? So at any given point, we can tap into even 10% of the available capacity would be significant. And then being able to then discharge that capacity at times when the grid has a need is probably the most exciting use case that we see in the future. EV-enabled virtual power plants, because that, for us is the ultimate goal and the vision that we think we can get behind and support. And with all the advancements that are happening in battery technology, technology standards that can interoperate the EVs with the grid, specifically, as it relates to grid charging standards. And then lastly is we're laser focused on customer experience, right? How do we actually make sure that the experience is ubiquitous for the customer on the apps as well as the infotainment system in the car itself? And that is going to, that seamless technology integration is going to really drive consumer confidence. And then lastly is the pilot programs like this, what we're doing with PG&E, plus also having unified interconnection standards for EVs, right? Because that's another opportunity that we've seen from the solar industry is how do we get ahead of that and drive uniformity in those interconnection standards such that we don't have customers waiting in queues. And so in my mind, I think those are the four things as I see how the evolution of this technology will happen in a way that drives operator confidence and grid planner confidence in using EVs as a resource to improve grid resilience and grid reliability.
Yeah, that's a really good rundown there. That's that's what I was looking for, and even as you said, the virtual power plant, sort of the holy grail of it all, and what Lydia was saying with the scale even today of
Yeah.
EVs, and then you think of the scale at much higher market penetration. I mean, you look at other places in Europe, China, where there's much higher EV adoption. Sorry, when you just look to those levels, the potential is just enormous. It's like
Yes.
it's crazy to think about how much grid storage capacity will be on the grid via EVs. Like it's so far beyond anything we've ever had or even contemplated that it's sort of just wild to think what's possible with that, and how much of the grid can be supported by virtual power plants of EVs, which is just it's a wild future, very fun, futuristic look at things. And I've had many conversations where I'm talking about like, oh, people don't really drive as much as they think. You'd be fine, charging every day or every other day. And they're like, oh, I drive a lot. It's like, oh, but I drive a lot. It's like, yeah, everybody drives a lot, but you're not driving 300 miles a day. People don't realize how little they drive. So there's so much lack of awareness there on what is needed from your electric car battery every day, and how much is left over probably for
Yes.
helping the grid.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, Zach, I think driving technology awareness and product awareness is probably one of the biggest opportunities we see in terms of how we actually create consumer interest. And two areas where I think GM is leaning in, I think very, very heavily is one, we are doing a series of marketing initiatives in order to really highlight, consumer stories, and as well as dealer stories, right? That really help us amplify the value of the experience, both from an EV ownership standpoint and also just peace of mind, right? How an EV can actually be a resource more than just a mobility asset, can be an energy asset as well, and how it actually, adds to the peace of mind and the range anxiety that the customers, are accustomed to today as they think about where am I going to charge. The fact that your EV can be a flexible resource to be able to tap into excess energy and then be able to discharge any of that stored capacity, I think creates more consumer confidence. Number two, I think for us is really a lot around opportunities like this. What we're doing, to really kind of get our word out, talk a lot about the technology. What I'd encourage is for you to check out some of our actual products in service, because a lot of what matters is how the customers experience the technology. Now that's real, it's scaling. We're actively working on improving the product and the experience. So as we go through these opportunities, getting the technology in the hands of the consumers is really the number one, right? Nothing beats the experience than what it takes when customer gets in the vehicle to drive, and then being able to use the system to be able to have it power the home in less than 30 seconds, right, when the lights go out, because the system is just flawless the way it works. So I think those are the two key areas where we're actually actively partnering with the brands, the four major brands under which we go to market, and the dealership networks to actually demo the product, get customers comfortable and experience it, because I think that's what's going to take initially to get overcome any trepidation the customer may have around new technologies.
Yeah, it's really exciting. When you mentioned dealers too, I got distracted for a moment because I'm thinking down the road when that dealer lot is full of EVs and they can all be plugged in and they can be offering tremendous grid services, with a lot full of EVs that don't need to drive that much every day, don't put that many miles on every day, and can be plugged into whatever number of stations. You think, wow, they could be like these kind of mini grid substation, energy storage station. So it's just fascinating to think about where this all can lead. But you guys seem to be 100% on top of it. Really, really, it's exciting to hear you in particular, Aseem, just kind of show how much you guys are thinking about and exploring and doing. With the press releases and stuff, there's limited information. It's always pretty similar. You get this generic story because you have to to communicate to people and to get the message out. But it's great to hear all the little things you're thinking about and exploring and solving in the background. So huge thanks to what you're doing. I'm really excited to see where the pilot program goes. It sounds like Lydia is going to be leading it to a really bright, exciting future. So we lost Lydia for a moment, but we just want to get your final thoughts, your big takeaways, anything we didn't cover or you wanted to come back to from this discussion. Yeah, let's hear what your final big thoughts are.
Yeah, so I think Aseem talked about this a couple of times as we were kind of having the conversation, right? Is this like kind of overall concept of customer experience and value? And I'll just say, like, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is in order for us to reach the scale that I believe that we need to reach when it comes to electric vehicles, we need to do two things. We need to make sure that the product is superior to an internal combustion engine vehicle, and we need to make sure that it's economically more valuable, right, than an internal combustion engine vehicle. And I think this pilot project sets us on a path to be able to do both by providing backup power in these EVs. It really creates an awesome feature that makes the product, I think, far superior to an internal combustion engine vehicle. And as we work on the phase 2 of these pilots in really truly understanding the value and finding ways to share the value both with the folks who are participating in these pilots and more broadly with all of our PG&E customers, it helps to make the product economically superior because it continues to help drive down the e-gallon price for fueling an EV for the customer who's participating, and it helps us to drive down our electric rates broadly for anybody who's looking to electrify.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I was sort of nitpicking on like how much value, how much do they need to make for it to be worth it to people? But overall, I feel like most people would be like, oh, you can make a bit of money just letting the grid modify the charging and discharging a bit. I mean, it seems sort of like a no-brainer to go with it. I mean, if you don't really have to be engaged in doing anything different, it's like, why not make free money?
Yeah.
Right? Or make easy money, So it always sounds appealing. I guess there's obviously just a breaking point for different people where, some people $20 a month is enough. Other people, they need $200 a month would be enough to sign on. It depends on, people, how much people are reticent or eager to engage in something like that. But I feel like a lot of people would just be like, oh, cool, yeah, sure, I'll take extra money, whatever.
Yeah, we call it anyways economics at PG&E, which is basically like your car's parked in your garage, right? And it's like you're not doing anything with it for 14 plus hours a day, and so like you might as well get some value out of that, especially like we talked about, if it's not going to create any type of like degradation problems, if it's just like the ability to make a little bit of the extra money while it's just there in the garage, like why not?
Yeah, and you talk to so many people, like potential EV owners, EV drivers, and it's always a question of how much range a car has and how long it takes to charge, and so many people just think they drive so much longer than they do. They think they drive like 300 miles a day, and that they need like 400, 500 miles of range in an EV. And like I was talking to someone recently, and I was like, explaining, the average person drives like 40 miles less a day, and and her husband and she were like, oh, I drive a lot. Like, oh, she drives a lot. I was like, yeah, but she doesn't drive much more than that. Like,
more than that.
Like you don't realize how little you drive and how much of the time the car is parked. So I think it's probably a lot easier once people are used to EV life. And right now, it's a fairly small percentage. I'm doing a report right now on California EV sales, and if it was its own market, separate like national market, it would have been the second biggest electric vehicle market in the world last year.
Wow.
It was a little higher than Germany, which had dropped a lot because of incentive changes, and a little higher than the UK, and of course second to China. But pretty wild that we often just think of it as a big part of the U.S. market, but it's actually by itself an enormous EV market that would be second globally, standing on its own. So there's a lot of opportunity there to get big early initiatives like this going. So thanks a lot for what you're doing. Really exciting. I'm super excited to see how it goes and see phase 2 and all that. So I hope we will look forward to talking with you in the future more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's been really awesome to talk some more about this and to dig in some of the fun details. And I think we're really excited to see where this goes and can't wait to share more as we get more results.